his address.
Oh my God. Ya Rabbi.
Witnesses caught the moment a drone fell close to the Dubai airport, as you see in this video, and other countries reported intercepting drones and missiles as well. We are covering these new developments with our reporters around the world. Nick Robertson and Jeremy Diamond are here with me. First, let's go to CNN's Jeremy Diamond in Tel Aviv. A very busy morning there, Jeremy. Sirens had been activated earlier this morning, and we do know, as we had been reported, 80 jets over Iran, taking out additional strikes, as well as to the north of you, the ongoing conflict there with Hezbollah.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot happening in the region at the moment, and we are witnessing, indeed, Israeli airstrikes in the skies of Tehran, dropping, hundreds of munitions in Iran, targeting everything from Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps command centers to the internal security forces known as the Basij, as well as ballistic missile launchers and stockpiles, some of which are located underground in Iran. We've seen continued Iranian ballistic missile attacks aimed here at Israel, but following the pattern of the last few days, there have been, today at least, no direct hits as a result of those ballistic missiles that we know of, and that is due in part to the degradation of Iran's ballistic missile capability so far. Meanwhile, last night, the Israeli military continuing to carry out strikes in Lebanon, including a deadly series of strikes that accompanied a commando raid carried out by Israeli forces inside of Lebanon in the town of Nabishit. At least 41 people were killed as a result of these Israeli attacks that happened as Israeli commandos went on the ground in this operation trying to locate the remains of this Israeli Air Force navigator, Ron Arad, who went down over Lebanon in 1986. His body has yet to be recovered or found, and it was not recovered in this Israeli military operation. But you can see in some of the footage from the aftermath of the strikes that accompanied that Israeli commando raid, massive holes in the ground, damage to buildings. At least 41 people were killed, according to Lebanon's health ministry. And it does appear like Hezbollah forces in the area engaged those Israeli soldiers and aircraft that were there, with Hezbollah saying that they targeted this force with, quote, light and medium weapons as commandos neared a cemetery in that village as they were again looking for the remains of that Israeli Air Force navigator. But even beyond this one commando raid, we are watching as Israel is intensifying its strikes in Lebanon and as Hezbollah is also intensifying its fire to northern Israel. Bianna.
All right, Jeremy Diamond reporting live from Tel Aviv for us. Thank you. Well, even with Iran's president apologizing in an apparently pre-recorded message this morning and saying that Iran would stop hitting its Gulf neighbors, we're hearing reports of new strikes. Iran's military says that it fired missiles and drones at U.S. sites in Bahrain and Qatar. And Saudi Arabia says that it shot down 20 drones overnight aimed at its Shaba oil field. Shaba is deep in the desert and pumps about 1 million barrels of oil a day. Let's go to CNN's Nick Robertson in Saudi Arabia. And Nick, it goes without saying, no one really views President Pezeshkian as the decision maker, as having authority there in that country, especially over this past week. And that has only been confirmed, given that just moments after he issued that statement and that pre-recorded video saying that attacks on neighboring countries would stop. Well, they were continuing just moments later.
Yeah, some of the heaviest, particularly around that Saudi oil field you're mentioning in the east of the country, more than 20 drones intercepted. And that's the highest that's been publicly acknowledged, at least, by the Ministry of Defense here. There were other efforts to hit Saudi, probably aimed at an airbase, the Prince Sultan airbase, 3 ballistic missiles intercepted there. But it speaks to the issue that everyone here, as you say, questions who is going to emerge in the leadership role in Iran, and what command and control will they have over the various military security proxies in the region. And I don't think anyone would put President Pezeshkian at the head of a list of likely power figures within Iran that's going to dictate the way forward, given the IRGC's hardline stance, military hardline stance, given that the weapons are in their hands and the hands of proxies who they have the relationship with. And we're just hearing reports of potentially some kind of strike or reports of explosions in Bahrain. Cannot confirm it, checking it out with sources, but that would, if that happened again, that would fly in the face of what the Iranian president's talking about today.
Completely. Nick Robertson, thank you so much. Please stay safe. Well, the escalating rhetoric comes the same day as President Trump will honor the 6 service members killed in a drone strike in Kuwait. CNN's Julia Benbrook is in Doral, Florida, where President Trump is speaking to Latin American leaders. Julia, tell us more about what the president had to say this morning.
Yeah, President Donald Trump, he is delivering remarks at what the administration is calling the SHIELD Summit. This is with Latin American leaders and focused on strengthening relationships there. But he started these remarks focusing on what is taking place in Iran, that ongoing conflict. And he said that he would give his administration a 15 out of 10 when it comes to how things have been handled so far. Now, when he wraps these remarks, we do expect him to travel to Dover, Delaware, to observe the dignified transfer of those 6 U.S. service members who lost their lives. And when Trump first announced that these strikes, the joint U.S.-Israel strikes against Iran, were taking place, he warned that American lives may be lost. And he has continued to say that while he hopes that number is limited, that we will likely see more lives lost. Now, I want to play for you some of his comments as he calls these service members great heroes.
After this, I'll be leaving for Dover, very sad situation, to greet the families of the heroes coming home from Iran, coming home in a different manner than they thought they'd be coming home. But they're great heroes in our country, and we're going to keep it that way. There's always, when it comes to war, there's always that. But we're going to keep it to a minimum, I think, Pete, and going to be something, a service that we're really providing, not for the Middle East, but for the world.
In addition to the president, we do expect First Lady Melania Trump, as well as Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance, to be in attendance there. As far as the timing of all of this, how long this could go on, we have heard multiple different time frames from the president throughout this. At one point, hearing that this could last a couple of days, then through the week. Then most recently, we've heard him saying somewhere between 4 and 5 weeks, but that it could go on longer and that the United States is capable of handling this if it does go on longer.
Well, we are seeing more attacks across the Middle East this morning. And just moments ago, officials in the United Arab Emirates said the country was responding to incoming missile and drone threats from Iran. Let's get to CNN's Paula Hancock's in Dubai. Paula, what are you hearing now? We were just having a conversation in the last few hours in response to this pre-taped message from President Pezeshkian saying that these attacks and strikes would end. Clearly, that's not the case.
Exactly, Bianna, and it was the case of saying, let's see what happens in the hours ahead. So we now know what happens. In Abu Dhabi, just an hour down the road from where we are, they have had emergency alerts and they have had explosions overhead, potentially interceptions of either missiles or drones, but certainly there have been a number of blasts that have been heard by our CNN teams on the ground. In fact, we have a CNN colleague at Abu Dhabi airport, and they were all told to take shelter as well. So this obviously answers the questions that we had as to whether or not what the Iranian president said would be taken into consideration by the individuals who are in charge of the missiles and the drones. We're also hearing that Bahrain has had emergency alerts as well. Of course, it was a question as to whether or not Pezeshkian actually had control of the armed forces, of the IRGC. It was widely expected that he did not. So even though he was saying that the three-member leadership council agreed this, it doesn't appear to have trickled down or been accepted by more hardline members. So let's just listen, though, to what exactly he did say this morning.
From now on, there should be no attack on neighbouring countries or missile strikes, unless they should wish to attack us from those countries. I think we need to solve this with diplomacy, rather than fighting and having conflict with neighbouring countries.
Now, that's exactly what the neighbouring countries have been saying for the past 7 days, angry at Tehran for taking out their retaliation on Gulf nations. Tehran claiming that they're only hitting US military targets or American political centres. We have seen that the impact has been felt far wider, that the targets have been far wider. Just this morning, in fact, we know that there was an impact at the Dubai International Airport. We spoke to a passenger inside who saw the moment of impact, the blast, saying that the windows were reverberating and they were told to seek shelter as well. That actually grounded planes for some time, but after about half an hour, Emirates said that they were resuming those repatriate flights once again. Bianna.
All right, Paula Hancock's in Dubai for us. Thank you so much. Well, this week, while some in Iran were mourning the death of their supreme leaders, others in Iran and around the world are celebrating it and welcoming the possibility of regime change.
Welcome back. We have breaking news coming in right now. CNN's team in Tehran is hearing new bomb blasts tonight, just as the Israeli Defense Forces announced a new wave of strikes hitting the Iranian military as much as they can. The Iranian Far News agency reports that the U.S. and Israel are targeting an oil refinery in southern Tehran at the same time. And it's important to note that CNN reports from Iran with the permission of the Iranian government. Meanwhile, we have new details now of a new CNN investigation that looks at just how close U.S. and Israeli strikes have come to hitting civilian sites in Iran. CNN's Katie Pugliese has the story.
A city under attack. It's also home to millions of people. The US and Israeli bombing campaign of Tehran has been targeting intelligence complexes, police stations and state broadcasters, but we verified videos and analysed satellite imagery and found the impact is going beyond that, due to the densely packed nature of the city and the large-scale weapons involved. Take a look at this satellite image. This crater is at least 40 foot wide. That means it was likely caused by a 2,000-pound bomb. The target, Iran's state broadcaster, the IRIB. The strike wiped out its communications mast. These bombs used by both the US and Israel are capable of killing or wounding people more than 1,000 feet away. And just 100 feet away is the Gandhi Hospital, one of the biggest in Tehran. Glass shattered, walls collapsed, and patients, including babies, being rushed out. As more videos like this one began to emerge, we started verifying them, pinpointing the hospital where each one was filmed. Then we cross-referenced with satellite imagery to see the damage caused by US and Israeli strikes. Like here, you can see the blown-out windows of the Gandhi Hospital from space. Over in another central part of Tehran is the Motahari Hospital. And just behind it is the Iranian police headquarters. In fact, you can see a police helicopter pad down here. This image is from just before it was struck, and this is after. Entire buildings flattened. The Motahari Hospital is still standing, but we verified this video showing substantial damage inside. It's not the only hospital in the area affected. Over here is the Khatam Hospital. Glass windows shattered, and medical staff are seen running out. Further down the same street is the Iranian Red Crescent Society. Smoke billowing from behind the building. Again, people are fleeing. Across Iran as a whole, more incidents like these are emerging. We geolocated this video to the Persian Gulf Hospital in the city of Beshahar. You can see newborn babies being carried out amid the rubble. It's unclear what the target was, but it's close to an airport and military airbase. But it's not just hospitals. Other civilian sites are also bearing the brunt of these strikes. This school in southern Iran was directly hit, resulting in the deaths of over 160 students and staff, according to Iranian state media. Neither the US nor Israel have acknowledged they caused the strike. It was just 200 feet from an Iranian military base. You can see multiple of their buildings hit, as well as damage to the school. Another strike hit this gym in Fars, southern Iran. There were reportedly 20 volleyball players inside at the time, Iranian media said. It was also right next to a police station. As strikes continue, access to safe medical facilities will be crucial, but the civilian toll is mounting. The human rights activist news agency now reporting over 1,000 dead. Katie Poglaze, CNN, London.
All right, welcome back. We're here in Tel Aviv. Broad-scale wave of overnight strikes against Iran, where we are right now, just about 8:30 p.m. And we just got alerts on our phone. The way it's been working here is you get an alert on your phone, and then anywhere from 1 to 8 minutes. That really depends on the amount of warning. Sirens usually blare, and that is when they anticipate missiles coming in, which we usually can see. And there we go. Okay, so you can hear those sirens. So that means we have a minute or two. So while we'll do that, I'm here with Eyal Hulata. I just want everyone to know that's who's here with me. I'm going to be talking to him as we walk. 23 years with Mossad, also head of the National Security Council here in Israel. So let me just unmic and get the other microphone. All right, Eyal, so here we are together. And we have an extra microphone here. Okay, so you can hear me. So this is something obviously you're used to. I will say, Eyal, as we're walking, we haven't had as many of these today as we did yesterday.
Right.
But this is obviously, we have this, and then usually we can see on the horizon when missiles come in.
Right.
And we often see the interceptions, and some obviously do break through. So how would you describe where we are right now, though? I mean, we've had fewer of these than yesterday, but the tempo has come down.
Right. So, I mean, it's, overall, we're making a lot of progress by way of the damage happening in Iran compared to what's happening here.
Yep.
It's a little bit funny to say this when we're having sirens and we're walking into a shelter, but this is actually the fact. As you say, there are fewer missiles coming. The rate of interception are way higher. There is some wreckage, of course, just because of things falling from the sky. Thank God, no casualties in many days now. And this is, I think, it means Iran will do whatever they can to continue to fire. Iran will never allow themselves not to be in a position to fire the last shot. Otherwise, it means they lost. So they will try to do this, and they will disrupt our lives. But is this making progress on their? That's the main question, of course, that we all ask.
And we're coming in here. Neville is holding our camera, so we're in a stairwell now. And I will just say, I'll explain to people the way buildings are built here. The center of them, the core where their stairwells are built obviously with the expectation that these sort of situations could come. So you come into the center of the building because the exterior of the building is what could be destroyed.
This is something to know about Israel. We have actually, because we've been in this situation for so long, we've invested a lot of money and a lot of resources to make sure that the people in Israel will be as safe as we can when things
Literally through how you, and that's part of the reason, if anyone looks at the skyline along the water, it's very concrete. But there's a reason for that.
The reason is
not about aesthetics.
I mean, we know that this can happen, right? I mean, this we've been fired at from multiple directions. Each new house in Israel, like for decades, have to have a shelter in it. And in the last 20, 30 years, the level of the shelter needs to be ready to deal with the kind of things that we're facing now.
Okay, so when I was watching today and there were sirens, and I looked outside before going into the stairwell, beautiful day, weekend, not a single soul visible.
Right.
Okay, that's here. You have people pulling back in terms of economic activity across the entire Gulf. Skies closed over Iraq, Tehran. There is a human question here of how long it can continue to be completely and utterly shut down. And that refers to the Strait of Hormuz, to oil, to airspace, to economies, to human lives.
Right. So, of course, war is damaging, right? It's disturbing, naturally. And this has been disturbing a lot of people in many countries, right? You mentioned the Gulf. They're getting more barrages than we are here. The UAE are getting hit with bigger numbers and drones and missiles and all the rest. Of course, the question is how long can this last? Well, first, this decision will be made in Washington, right? I mean, I think President Trump is fully cognizant in this. And I think that as the accumulation of damage in Iran is going up, and it is, the success of the operation in Iran is significant and it's growing every day. I would assume that it's a matter of I think, days, not weeks, where the balance will shift in the sense that we understand that there is diminishing return of every day, that this continues. Iran is weak, and the incentive to bring this to an end, I think, will increase as it comes.
You spent 20 you were head of the National Security Council here. I'm just looking at one important development out of Iran to try to get some context on, and that is one of the clerics that would be the guardians to choose a new supreme leader is cited in state media in Iran, Far's agency, saying we need to get this done, essentially, and putting a 24-hour time frame on it. Right. It's taken them a week. What do you read into that?
So I think the situation of the regime in Iran and the decision-making is fractured significantly. They've said since Supreme Leader was killed that they will appoint a new Supreme Leader very fast, as you say. And it has been a week now.
They didn't do it.
They didn't do it. And then there were rumors that they will appoint Supreme Leader Khamenei's son, Mujtaba Khamenei, as his successor, which actually makes very little sense when we're talking about this kind of regime. This is nepotism. This shouldn't happen like this. But in any case, this is where they're at. I think there is a strong conflict between the clerics and the hardliner in the military as to what will be the best way to try and keep Iran strong in the region. Otherwise, it is going down even more and more, which I think it is. I mean, I know it's hard to view this when, again, we are in a shelter. There have been American casualties. Oil prices are going high. But the world's largest terror sponsor country is being degraded in a way that they're not even able to define who the new leader will be. And I think overall, when this ends, this is going to be good for the stability of the region.
So the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, a person who had done meeting with reporters in the West, I met with him in September, right? I know he was, relative to Iranian politics, seen as somewhat of a more reformist, at least an apologetic character for some things. And people say he's not really in charge, he's weak. So he comes out today, he says, I'm sorry to the Gulf. As long as you don't attack from our, let Americans attack off your bases, we won't attack you. And then there's been attacks since then. So some people say, well, that's because he doesn't have any power. But he also referenced specifically that their command and control is not functioning and that there are some military units who are not hearing what they're being told. Yeah. Okay, what is the state of the Iranian military's operation right now? When they're firing missiles here right now, is that being done from the top, or is that being done because 3 weeks ago they were told they should keep doing that? Do you know?
So I think IRGC still have some level of command and control. And I think it's more that Pezeshkian doesn't really have any authority over IRGC than anything else. I mean, because as you say, he promised that there will be no firing at all. And there have been 10 rounds of barrages on the UAE alone today. Since he said that, right? To a point where Mohammed bin Zayed comes out and says that the UAE are strong and they're not going to take it anymore, and they have to put their act together, calling his people to be resilient. The president of the United Arab Emirates, a very brave man, right? The leader of the Abraham Accords, together with President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is really serious. I think Pezeshkian doesn't speak for the true decision makers of Iran. He might try to do this. I remember your interview with him in September. I think he was trying to make the West believe that he's actually in control and that there is someone that is normal that can be dealt with. But he's not calling any of the important shots.
So the IRGC is calling the shots?
IRGC are calling the shots. They have their ranks. Ali Larijani, which was given authorities, Ali Larijani was the National Security Advisor, the top advisor to Supreme Leader Khamenei. I think in that realm, this is what they're trying to do. And I think what's more important for them at the moment is to make sure that they're not seen as weak, that they hold their position. But they are weak. They're weaker than people think, except that, when the audience sees us now at the shelter, they might get the idea that maybe it's in reverse. But actually, they're firing less and less every day.
All right, Al Halada, as I said, former security advisor here in Israel and also 23 years in Mossad. Wolf, let's send it back to you in Washington from Tel Aviv.
All right, Aaron, excellent work, and thank Ayal for me as well. I'm looking, and all of our viewers are seeing, Aaron, right now, these live pictures from this major street in Tel Aviv. It's a Saturday night. Normally, as you know, and I've been to Tel Aviv many times, Saturday night in Tel Aviv, the streets would be packed, people would be walking, they would be going about, and it's empty right there. So when the sirens go off, everybody sort of heads into a stairwell or a shelter where you are right now, as we saw you do with Ayal.
They do. You know, Wolf, I think there's two interesting things to say there. One, yes, even if you're downstairs in a lobby of a hotel, people will come in off the street. And so the basement, you know, that's full with toilet paper supplies and things for the kitchens will be just jammed with people. Some of them coming off the streets, you know, people, various states of dress, okay, they all come in. So people observe it. But there's a second point I'd make, Wolf, and that is that the streets aren't crowded to begin with. Most things are closed. It is in sort of this war pause right now where kids are not at school and businesses are not open. And that's also keeping the streets empty as well. So it's a double whammy, I'd say, Wolf.
You and your camera crew heard the sirens. You had to leave your location and headed to a shelter in a stairwell in that building where you are. I take it you have it all clear now, is that right?
Yes, so then you get an all clear, and usually that's a combination, Wolf, of sort of an art and a science. Sometimes there is a formal, it is an all clear. Sometimes after people have heard a bunch of interceptions, or sometimes missiles do break through, then they will go back out. That time, Wolf, it was unclear whether there was one or two. Our crew could see in the distance one appearing interception of a missile, but there also at the same time was attacks coming from the north, from Lebanon and Hezbollah. And I want to bring in my colleague Jeremy Diamond, because Jeremy and I were talking about that. There was a time when there was reporting that Hezbollah and Iran were going to do coordinated attacks. And there was a time when we were sitting here and we heard and saw that. Right. Now, what we just saw right now, missiles coming from Iran and missiles or rockets coming from Hezbollah, at the same time, it's unclear whether they're coordinated, but if they are, that would indicate that the kind of disarray in the government and no internet in Iran may not apply to the IRGC.
Yeah, it's particularly because the reporting that we had in the lead up to this is that following the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, over a year ago, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps took really tight control of Hezbollah, the closest command and control that they've had of Hezbollah probably ever during the decades of Hassan Nasrallah's rule. And so the indication is now that with Hezbollah entering the fray, they are now following orders in large part from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And so despite the fact that inside of Iran, we are seeing these questions of, you know, Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, his orders may not be being followed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, particularly as he's saying that some of these airports and these targets in the Gulf are not going to be hit, but then they are being hit by the IRGC. It suggests that the disarray that exists between the kind of political echelon and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran, it may not be the case in terms of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps itself, that it is kind of a cohesive unit that is working effectively to still carry out the attacks they want to do, including by using this proxy of Hezbollah, which we are seeing right now. Actually, more alerts coming in the north. The city of Haifa is currently under air raid sirens once again.
Right, but just it's an important question. I mean, and it's hard because we don't know what we don't know. But when you see kind of the acknowledgement from the Foreign Minister Iraqi and also Pezeshkian, right, that maybe our military units may not be fully in communication, essentially, but that if they are in communication with each other, the significance of what that might mean.
So then the question is,
how call the shots in Iran?
How can these Gulf countries trust the assurances that they're no longer going to be hit unless, again, their bases are used for attacks on Iran, when it doesn't seem like these political leaders are having their orders listened to? Right.
It's a huge question, and obviously the fact that the UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed, known as MBZ, spoke out and referred to Iran as the enemy is very significant, right? For him to speak out at all, he went and was visiting people in the hospital who have been injured and spoke extemporaneously. All right, Jeremy Diamond, thank you very much. And I want to go to Iraq, yet another front, if you can call it that, in this chaotic war. A drone attack sparked fires at warehouses of U.S. energy firms, big ones, Halliburton and KBR. The attack was in the port city of Basra, which is obviously crucial for oil exports, and was targeting a compound housing employees. This is Reuters' latest reporting, and you can see the flames there in Basra. It's happening just hours after the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad warned Americans to leave Iraq, and they had explicitly warned that hotels could come under attack in the north of Iraq, in the Kurdish area, that those hotels could be attacked. And soon after that, in fact, it actually happened. And it was a drone that exploded near a hotel in Erbil, which is the capital of the Iraqi Kurdistan region. Our Clarissa Ward has been there through the week in this war, and it was a pro-Iranian Islamist militant group in Iraq that claimed responsibility for that, just showing the complexity of the Pandora's box that may indeed already have been opened here. Clarissa, what are you learning about that warning, the explosion near the hotel, and of course now you're seeing U.S. oil and energy firms under attack in Basra?
That's right, Aaron. Things definitely escalating here in Iraq. Just in the last few hours, the U.S. has conducted at least 2 airstrikes near Mosul, the city of Iraq, against these Iran-backed Iraqi militias that have just been hammering any U.S. presence they can inside Iraq, the oil companies, the embassies. We have also seen in the last few hours a number of rockets being fired towards the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and all of this really raising concerns that this is rapidly getting out of control. Aaron, you talked about the hotels. This was a new development last night. The State Department, or I should say the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, putting out a statement warning people against staying in hotels in Iraq's Kurdistan region with a large number of foreigners staying in them. Well, the issue with that, Aaron, is that all of the contractors who work at these various oil companies and gas fields and U.S. consulates and U.S. bases have largely been moved off of those places and into hotels throughout this region, just literally a few hours after they had put out that warning that people should avoid these hotels. We saw 4 drones coming into the center of Erbil. Most of them were intercepted, but one of them appeared to explode next to, or hitting even, a hotel in the center of town. I should say that it looked like a fairly small drone. The damage was not extensive, but all of this sending a very clear and very chilling message, which is that civilian targets are not off the table and civilians are not off the table. And the Embassy of Baghdad urging Americans to leave Iraq as quickly as possible. As of yet, of course, the airspace is still closed here. They recommended using overland routes, potentially to Jordan or Turkey. But for the leadership here in Iraqi Kurdistan, but also in Baghdad, don't worry, those are just fireworks. There are real concerns that all of the escalating tensions could put really profound pressure on the Iraqi state, which, as our viewers may understand, after many years of war, is really based on a sort of fragile latticework of allegiances and alliances that are now being challenged in real time, Aaron.
All right, Clarissa, thank you very much. In Erbil, and you could hear those sort of explosions behind Clarissa. She said those were fireworks, but just shows how jumpy people are, but also perhaps just the oddness of the juxtaposition of sometimes more normalcy of life continuing next to what's actually happening here in a war zone, where you've got millions and millions of people sitting, waiting, wondering what's coming next. Now, a key target of the U.S. and Israeli strikes has been Iran's missile launchers. That's really been a focus of this, right? To try to do the balance of taking out more missile launchers before they could take out missile defenses on the other side. CNN Tom's Foreman is taking a closer look exactly at those launchers. Where are they? And why taking them out is the crucial math of this war.
You're looking at a life-size model of an Iranian missile launcher, and this is what U.S. and Israeli forces have really been targeting out there. By some accounts, they may have taken out more than half of them already. Why are they after these launchers? Because if you go after the launchers, you can go after the missiles, which are so key to all Iranian offensive and defensive operations, especially very advanced missiles like the Khorramshahr 4, which we're showing here. What I'm going to do is push this off into the desert out here so we can talk about its capabilities. It's about 40 feet long. It weighs about as much as a fully loaded fire truck. It is liquid fueled, which means it has a higher propulsion rate or stronger propulsion than you would get from a solid fueled rocket, and that's important because it can carry a heavier load. If they had a nuclear weapon, this missile would carry it, according to most military analysts. And that yellow cone up there is believed to have the ability to adjust its direction on the way down toward its target. Most ballistic missiles don't have that, and that can be confounding to some of these missile defense systems. So that's why they're watching it carefully. What about range? Would this reach the United States? Absolutely not. But by best estimates, it would easily go from Iran over to Israel over here, which is basically from Washington, D.C. to Kansas, if you want to look at it that way. And look what's in between. Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Oman and Bahrain and Jordan and Iraq, all these Middle Eastern countries we talk about. That's why there's so much focus on the missile supply in Iran. It is largely believed that a lot of them may be buried underground now, where even bunker buster bombs have a hard time getting to them. So military analysts keep talking about the idea of sending people in on the ground to say maybe they can find them that way and disable them, because they're there and have some capability of being fired. They're still a really potent force.
There have been blasts heard in Bahrain, in Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, as well as in the UAE, particularly the capital of Abu Dhabi today, despite a promise this morning from Iran's president that strikes on Arab Gulf nations would stop as long as no strikes against Iran originated from American bases in those countries. But the explosions continued well after those comments from the Iranian president, Mahmoud Pezeshkian. CNN's international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson joins me from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And of course, there's been explosions there. And Nick, what's the response to that? I mean, right, they're told that this won't happen to you, and essentially an apology from Pezeshkian, and then it continues. So what are you hearing?
And then it continues. And this afternoon of hours, a ballistic missile impacted in open space. In fact, that is the first time the MOD here has said a ballistic missile impacted, that it wasn't intercepted, and that landed just, well, it was believed to be targeted at the Prince Sultan airbase just outside the capital here. So officials that I was speaking to this afternoon wanted to reserve judgment and judge based on actions, the words that they heard from the president and the actions that they're seeing. They haven't made an official comment here yet, but the actions that they're seeing clearly don't align with the words of the president. The Bahrainis, who, as you mentioned there, have been taking strikes again this afternoon, have released an official statement, an official there telling me that they've heard the words of President Pezeshkian. They welcome his apology. They say that Bahrain has always been in favor of dialogue and diplomacy, but they say the actions need to match the words on what they're seeing. They say the strikes on Bahrain this afternoon, following the president's remarks, don't match, don't tally. So, you know, people here are wondering, is it an effort by the Iranian leadership just to fool the Gulf, the countries in the Gulf? Is it divisions within the leadership? Is it that the president doesn't really control the military, who control the weapons? And of course, leaders here are looking to Iranian social media to see that, and it's a very confusing picture, given that they also didn't really trust or believe that President Pezeshkian had the weight to control the military in Iran. So I think this puts everyone here in the position of, oh, there might have been some kind of diplomacy in play. Reality is nothing but Iran continuing appears to be in play. And as you say, the significance of the fact that a ballistic missile got through
is the sort of thing that can change the calculus on the ground. Nick Robertson, thank you so much in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for us tonight and this afternoon, of course, in Washington. Coming up, a warning from President Trump. He is saying attacks will ramp up against Iran, and I'm, just getting a note here that our crew on the ground, our crew, Fred Pleiken, has just heard more strikes. We're going to talk to a retired Army Lieutenant General to take a look at exactly what is happening on the ground here. What do the tactics, what do the strikes actually show about what this war is about and where it is going? You're in this.
Happening now here in the CNN newsroom, there's breaking news. Quote, Iran will be hit very hard. Direct quote. A fresh warning today from President Donald Trump. Plus, an Iranian senior cleric now saying only a few moments ago a new supreme leader in Iran could be chosen in the next 24 hours. And later this hour, President Trump will attend the dignified transfer of 6 U.S. service members who lost their lives in a drone strike in Kuwait during the early stages of the war with Iran. Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington, and we're following major developments, including the breaking news, a new threat of escalation from President Trump as the war with Iran enters its second week. The president warning today that, quote, Iran will be hit very hard, end quote, and he vowed to go after areas and groups of people that were previously not considered for targeting by the U.S. Dramatic footage shows huge explosions and fires at Tehran's busiest airport after Israel launched a new attacks overnight. Israel says it used more than 80 fighter jets to carry out these pre-dawn strikes in Iran. The IDF says it hit 16 Iranian military aircraft at the airport. And those attacks are happening as Iran's president delivered a remarkable national address earlier this morning. He said his country will never surrender, just a day after President Trump said he wouldn't negotiate with Iran without a, quote, unconditional surrender by Iran. The Iranian president also apologizing to those Gulf neighbors, saying Tehran would stop striking those countries as long as no attacks on Iran originated from those nations. And all of this happening as President Trump is set to attend the dignified transfer of 6 U.S. service members killed in the conflict, and that's taking place at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware this hour. We'll have extensive coverage of that. My colleague and friend CNN anchor Erin Burnett is live in Tel Aviv, and she'll be joining me for our special live CNN coverage over the next 3 hours. Erin, first of all, bring us up to speed on the situation where you are.
All right, Wolf, well, you talk about the escalation over in Tehran and those pre-dawn attacks that filled the sky with smoke and fire. Here we had alerts, but I will say, Wolf, important, there were fewer today than we saw yesterday. But one thing that stands out as everyone tries to understand what this war's objectives are and what that might mean for where it goes next. The streets here, bizarrely and eerily deserted. It is a war zone, it is a war, but of course it raises the questions on how long that can continue here and across this region. Wolf, one other thing, who's with me here in Tel Aviv in just a moment. You mentioned that news out of Tehran, the state-affiliated news agency Fars, reporting that one of the clerics of the 88 who's going to be responsible for selecting the next supreme leader said to state television, I want to give the full quote here because it's perhaps very important. He said, Ayatollah Mosafari, we have firm hope that with divine success, this work will take place within the next 24 hours. The last time, of course, there was a shift in the supreme leader all the way back about 40 years ago. It happened within 24 hours. And here we are almost, we are now a week past, more than a week past the Ayatollah being eliminated. And still no supreme leader. Obviously pressure now coming from within. So we're watching that because that could be very significant. All right, as promised, Jeremy Diamond is here with me in Tel Aviv. And Jeremy, that news matters. The leader of the UAE speaking out for the first time, referring to Iran as an enemy, obviously also significant, all of these things.
Yeah, and the question is whether any of these regional dynamics that we're starting to see play out will either cause the situation to escalate further or whether we could see a potential off-ramp start to develop here. And and especially inside of Iran, we've seen some conflicting signals about who exactly is in charge, whether or not there are some fissures that are starting to show between Iran's political leadership and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So these are all key questions, but it certainly doesn't change the game plan for the United States and Israel at this moment, as both countries are continuing to carry out extensive strikes across Iran. In Iran, over the course of the last 48 hours, the Israeli military has struck more than 300 targets overnight. They carried out one wave of strikes that was especially broad, with 80-plus fighter jets going in at the same time to strike everything from ballistic missile launchers to Revolutionary Guard Corps targets and much, much more. And meanwhile, we're still watching this activity in Lebanon, as the Israeli military carried out this overnight raid where they killed at least 41 people, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. This was an operation where they were trying to rescue the remains of a deceased airman who went over the skies of Lebanon in 1986, actually. His body has been missing for more than 40 years. The Israeli military carrying out this operation, and it seems to have been very deadly, and it did not result in them actually retrieving that body. There was crossfire apparently between the Israeli military and Hezbollah forces there as well.
Tragedy there, and I know they say up to 300 according to Lebanese sources, right? People are dead there, in addition to now, 1,200 in Iran. All right, Jeremy Diamond, thank you very much. And to go to Iraq now, which has also become an important focus of this war, a drone attack sparking fires at warehouses belonging to two very important U.S. firms that operate there, the oil drilling company Halliburton and KBR, which is an oil services company, right? So right at the heart of the global economy. That attack was in the port city of Basra, crucial to oil exports, and it targeted a compound housing employees. And this is according to Reuters reporting, and it happened just hours after the United States Embassy in Baghdad warned Americans to leave Iraq. They said that some hotels up in the north and the Kurdish part of the country could be a target of pro-Iranian militias. Well, they had a heads up, but not much, because within a couple hours of that warning, a drone exploded near a hotel in Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. It's in fact the capital of that region. And contractors, Americans, members of the military have all been using hotels in that area. A pro-Iranian Islamist militant group in Iraq claimed responsibility for that specific attack. And our Clarissa Ward is in Erbil. She's obviously been to that site. She's our chief international correspondent. And Clarissa, what are you hearing now about this warning, that explosion, and what the risk still is for Americans and hotels? Really, hotels the only place for so many Americans where you are to go.
So it's interesting, Aaron, just in the last 2 hours, there have been at least 2 U.S. airstrikes on the bases of these Iran-backed militias in the Iraqi city of Mosul, a number of casualties as a result of those strikes. And these are the groups, these militias, that have just been hammering U.S. targets throughout the region, but they have also been hitting targets here in Iraqi Kurdistan. Now, you mentioned those hotels. There are so many contractors, Aaron, who were working for U.S. companies on U.S. bases for U.S. oil fields who have been moved away from those installations or bases, who are being put up temporarily in hotels. And I should say it's not just 1 or 2. They're in pretty much every hotel you find here in the city of Erbil. And yesterday, effectively, this alliance of pro or Iran-backed Iraqi militias declaring that these hotels are now a target and will continue to be a target as long as they are hosting American citizens. Now, we know that the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad has urged Americans to depart Iraq. They have issued some guidance as to some of the routes that people could try to take, because obviously the airspace here is completely closed, Aaron. They have said that you could try to go by land to Jordan or potentially to Turkey, but still, many Americans and contractors of other nationalities as well still trapped here. And of course, for the leadership of Iraqi Kurdistan, this whole situation poses a profound dilemma. They do not want to be involved in this war. They cannot afford the risk that the Iranian regime will retaliate if they support the U.S., that the U.S. will change its mind about what the strategic objective or what the necessary outcome of this war is. I spoke to one leader here who said one day President Trump says it's regime change, the next day it's not regime change. And so as a result, they're trying to walk this very fine line of appeasing their interests, obviously have a very warm and good relationship with the U.S., but also not wanting to incur the wrath of Iran, and particularly, Aaron, with regards to these Iranian Kurdish opposition forces who are based here in Iraqi Kurdistan, who have made it known that they would like to launch some kind of a ground operation inside Western Iran, and as a result of which we have seen continued drone and missile strikes on those camps, again, just ratcheting up real concerns that this could pose a real challenge, not just for Iraqi Kurdistan, but for the whole of Iraq as a cohesive state, Aaron.
No retreat, baby. No surrender. The words of the boss. I'm Michael Smerconish in the Philly Burbs. President Trump has demanded Iran's unconditional surrender. The Iranian president responded by saying that's a dream they should take to their grave. Trump's rebuttal? Today, Iran will be hit very hard. The president said that under serious consideration for complete destruction will now be areas and groups of people not previously considered for targeting. The Iranian president also apologized to his Gulf state neighbors and said Iran's attacks against them will stop. But soon after he said those words, they had not ceased, raising a question of whether Iran's political leadership can control its military forces. Overnight explosions rocked Tehran. Israel said that it used more than 80 fighter jets in its pre-dawn strikes targeting military infrastructure. Today, the casualties of this war will come to the shores of the United States, when this afternoon the bodies of 6 U.S. service members killed in the conflict will be flown to Dover Air Force Base. President Trump and Vice President Vance set to attend the dignified transfer. One of America's biggest enemies coming to the aid of Iran. Sources say that Russia is now providing intel on U.S. military targets. And in a Washington Post column today, Fareed Zakaria points out that while Israel might well welcome the chaos of regime collapse, the United States and its allies cannot. Where Trump initially exhorted the Iranian people to overthrow their government, he has more recently changed course and mused about dealing with potential leaders within the regime. In a Friday telephone call, President Trump told Dana Bash that he hopes Iran will go the way of Venezuela, where acting President Delcy Rodriguez is doing what the president called a fantastic job, and said that he was open to a religious leader who was not democratically elected so long as they treat the United States and Israel well. Which brings to mind a different lyric. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss? Maybe the president is open to another religious, undemocratically elected leader, but what about Israel? Writes Fareed, the most dangerous element of this war, however, is not that the lead actor is improvising like a saxophone player. It's that the two countries waging the war have separate and perhaps incompatible agendas. For Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the war is clearly about destroying the Islamic Republic. He acknowledged that this war was the culmination of a 40-year-old dream. He's also using the opportunity to take out Hezbollah, root and branch. Let's go live to the region. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson is in Riyadh, and CNN's Jerusalem correspondent Jeremy Diamond is in Tel Aviv. Jeremy, I'll start with you. President Trump told Dana Bash new leadership need not be democratic, could be a religious leader. Will Israel be satisfied with that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to note that for Israel, the primary concern is not necessarily who is in charge of Iran, but what the behavior of a future Iranian state, Iranian regime is towards the state of Israel and what kind of activities it engages in the region. You know, even if it were to be a non-religious leader who keeps up the practices of arming proxies in the region, etc., then Israel certainly wouldn't be satisfied with that. And I think the question could be posed, I guess, theoretically, if it was a religious leader who accepted Israel's presence in the region, then that might also satisfy Israel's concerns. But ultimately, I think it's about looking at Israel's goals in this war as kind of a tiered system. You know, at the very most basic level, Israel wants to ensure that the Iranian nuclear threat is neutralized, that the ballistic missile threat is neutralized, and then obviously they do have this overarching goal of regime change. And we've been watching as Israeli strikes in Iran have been targeting all of the different institutions of power inside of Iran. the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, of course, military targets, senior political leaders that were taken out in the opening hours of this war, as well as other targets throughout Iran, like the internal security forces, the Basij, aimed at trying to kind of take out root and branch all of the elements that prop up this regime for whether Israel can actually achieve that goal or not remains an enormous open question, particularly, as you were just noting, given the fact that the United States and Israel may not be fully aligned on how far they're willing to go to ensure that regime change is actually the outcome of this war.
Jeremy, thanks for that report. Nick Robertson, the Iranian president, apologized to the Gulf states even as missiles and drones were flying their way. What's been the Saudi response so far?
Yeah, talking to sources, they're not prepared to commit at the moment. Actions speak louder than words. You have, just earlier in the week, the Iranians trying to hit one of the massive oil facilities here in the east of the country. They didn't manage, but debris fell. Part of the plant had to be shut down temporarily. And back then you had the deputy Iranian foreign minister coming on CNN saying, actually, it wasn't us, that Iran didn't do it. So, you know, last night you have the biggest, publicly announced at least by the Ministry of Defense here, Iranian assault more than 20 drones on another major oil field. Ballistic missiles fired at a Saudi airbase last night, missiles whizzing around Riyadh as well that were intercepted. So for the Saudis, look, if this is the beginning of a diplomatic off-ramp of some kind, they will be exceptionally happy and relieved about it. But I don't think anyone here takes it at face value. They know the Iranians well. They know what they're dealing with. The president were in command and control of the security forces in Iran. What he says one day and how he wants to control them one day, again, the caveat, even if he was in charge, and not many people suspect he is, would he change tack in 2 days' time? These are all big questions.
Nick, President Trump in his first presidency was beloved in Saudi Arabia for being hard on Iran. Now they're caught in a war that he started. Has the mood relative to President Trump changed at all?
Yeah, interesting question. Last night I was out asking Saudis that. In fact, I went to the same street where there was the Harley-Davidson cafe. It's been become another cafe now. Talked to the bikers, talked to the residents of this city about what they think. And it was that number of years ago when I was in the same place asking them the same question about President Trump. Look, for some of them, they still love him. They still really like President Trump. They see him as a strong leader. You keep hearing that from people here. And in this region, they love strong leaders. But there's a more nuance to it now. Beloved in part, but kind of feared a little bit because, quite simply, they see the president, because of his actions over the years, they interpret them as being more mercurial. So they're not sure if they get drawn into a war, will the president then back out of it precipitously, leave them in a war? So you have these questions now in people's minds factored in. But he's still popular here, but perhaps more cautiously so.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Bianca Godrigo. You are in the CNN newsroom. We begin this hour with breaking news. President Trump spoke just moments ago from the Shields of America summit. The summit is mainly focused on stopping narco-terrorism in Latin America, but the president did address the ongoing war in Iran.
We're doing very well in Iran. You see the result, and it's been amazing. We've knocked out 42 Navy ships, some of them very large, in 3 days. That was the end of the Navy. We knocked out their Air Force. We knocked out their communications, and all telecommunications is gone. I don't know how they communicate, but I guess they will figure something out. It's not working out too well.
The war with Iran escalated this morning, with both countries trading threats. Iranian officials say they are looking for new U.S. targets after President Trump warned that Iran will be, quote, hit very hard today. Trump posted on Truth Social that Washington would widen its targets in Iran and that certain areas and groups of people are now at risk of, quote, complete destruction and certain death. Well, both Israel and Iran launched new strikes overnight. Israel deployed more than 80 jets for the strikes, and at one point, Tehran's major airport was on fire. Israel also carried out a major operation in Lebanon. Authorities there say dozens were killed after the raid along the border. Israel says their troops were looking for a missing IDF navigator, Ron Arad, who has been missing for nearly 40 years. In Iran, the president there apologized for recent strikes on neighboring countries and promised to stop them. But then those strikes continued even after his address.
Oh my God. Ya Rabbi.
Witnesses caught the moment a drone fell close to the Dubai airport, as you see in this video, and other countries reported intercepting drones and missiles as well. We are covering these new developments with our reporters around the world. Nick Robertson and Jeremy Diamond are here with me. First, let's go to CNN's Jeremy Diamond in Tel Aviv. A very busy morning there, Jeremy. Sirens had been activated earlier this morning, and we do know, as we had been reported, 80 jets over Iran, taking out additional strikes, as well as to the north of you, the ongoing conflict there with Hezbollah.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot happening in the region at the moment, and we are witnessing, indeed, Israeli airstrikes in the skies of Tehran, dropping, hundreds of munitions in Iran, targeting everything from Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps command centers to the internal security forces known as the Basij, as well as ballistic missile launchers and stockpiles, some of which are located underground in Iran. We've seen continued Iranian ballistic missile attacks aimed here at Israel, but following the pattern of the last few days, there have been, today at least, no direct hits as a result of those ballistic missiles that we know of, and that is due in part to the degradation of Iran's ballistic missile capability so far. Meanwhile, last night, the Israeli military continuing to carry out strikes in Lebanon, including a deadly series of strikes that accompanied a commando raid carried out by Israeli forces inside of Lebanon in the town of Nabishit. At least 41 people were killed as a result of these Israeli attacks that happened as Israeli commandos went on the ground in this operation trying to locate the remains of this Israeli Air Force navigator, Ron Arad, who went down over Lebanon in 1986. His body has yet to be recovered or found, and it was not recovered in this Israeli military operation. But you can see in some of the footage from the aftermath of the strikes that accompanied that Israeli commando raid, massive holes in the ground, damage to buildings. At least 41 people were killed, according to Lebanon's health ministry. And it does appear like Hezbollah forces in the area engaged those Israeli soldiers and aircraft that were there, with Hezbollah saying that they targeted this force with, quote, light and medium weapons as commandos neared a cemetery in that village as they were again looking for the remains of that Israeli Air Force navigator. But even beyond this one commando raid, we are watching as Israel is intensifying its strikes in Lebanon and as Hezbollah is also intensifying its fire to northern Israel. Bianna.
All right, Jeremy Diamond reporting live from Tel Aviv for us. Thank you. Well, even with Iran's president apologizing in an apparently pre-recorded message this morning and saying that Iran would stop hitting its Gulf neighbors, we're hearing reports of new strikes. Iran's military says that it fired missiles and drones at U.S. sites in Bahrain and Qatar. And Saudi Arabia says that it shot down 20 drones overnight aimed at its Shaba oil field. Shaba is deep in the desert and pumps about 1 million barrels of oil a day. Let's go to CNN's Nick Robertson in Saudi Arabia. And Nick, it goes without saying, no one really views President Pezeshkian as the decision maker, as having authority there in that country, especially over this past week. And that has only been confirmed, given that just moments after he issued that statement and that pre-recorded video saying that attacks on neighboring countries would stop, well, they were continuing just moments later.
Yeah, some of the heaviest, particularly around that Saudi oil field you're mentioning in the east of the country, more than 20 drones intercepted. And that's the highest that's been publicly acknowledged, at least, by the Ministry of Defence here. There were other efforts to hit Saudi, probably aimed at an airbase, the Prince Sultan airbase, 3 ballistic missiles intercepted there. But it speaks to the issue that everyone here, as you say, questions who is going to emerge in the leadership role in Iran, and what command and control will they have over the various military security proxies in the region. And I don't think anyone would put President Pezeshkian at the head of a list of likely power figures within Iran that's going to dictate the way forward, given the IRGC's hardline stance, military hardline stance, given that the weapons are in their hands and the hands of proxies who they have the relationship with. And we're just hearing reports of potentially some kind of strike or reports of explosions in Bahrain. Cannot confirm it, checking it out with sources, but that would, if that happened again, that would fly in the face of what the Iranian president's talking about today.
Completely. Nick Robertson, thank you so much. Please stay safe. Well, the escalating rhetoric comes the same day as President Trump will honor the 6 service members killed in a drone strike in Kuwait. CNN's Julia Benbrook is in Doral, Florida, where President Trump is speaking to Latin American leaders. Julia, tell us more about what the president had to say this morning.
Yeah, President Donald Trump, he is delivering remarks at what the administration is calling the SHIELD Summit. This is with Latin American leaders and focused on strengthening relationships there. But he started these remarks focusing on what is taking place in Iran, that ongoing conflict. And he said that he would give his administration a 15 out of 10 when it comes to how things have been handled so far. Now, when he wraps these remarks, we do expect him to travel to Dover, Delaware, to observe the dignified transfer of those 6 U.S. service members who lost their lives. And when Trump first announced that these strikes, the joint U.S.-Israel strikes against Iran, were taking place, he warned that American lives may be lost. And he has continued to say that while he hopes that number is limited, that we will likely see more lives lost. Now, I want to play for you some of his comments as he calls these service members great heroes.
After this, I'll be leaving for Dover, very sad situation, to greet the families of the heroes coming home from Iran, coming home in a different manner than they thought they'd be coming home. But they're great heroes in our country, and we're going to keep it that way. There's always, when it comes to war, there's always that. But we're going to keep it to a minimum, I think, Pete. And going to be something, a service that we're really providing, not for the Middle East, but for the world.
In addition to the president, we do expect First Lady Melania Trump, as well as Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance, to be in attendance there. As far as the timing of all of this, how long this could go on, we have heard multiple different time frames from the president throughout this. At one point, hearing that this could last a couple of days, then through the week. Then most recently, we've heard him saying somewhere between 4 and 5 weeks, but that it could go on longer and that the United States is capable of handling this if it does go on longer.
Well, we are seeing more attacks across the Middle East this morning. And just moments ago, officials in the United Arab Emirates said the country was responding to incoming missile and drone threats from Iran. Let's get to CNN's Paula Hancock's in Dubai. Paula, what are you hearing now? We were just having a conversation in the last few hours in response to this pre-taped message from President Pezeshkian saying that these attacks and strikes would end. Clearly, that's not the case.
Exactly, Bianna, and it was the case of saying, let's see what happens in the hours ahead. So we now know what happens. In Abu Dhabi, just an hour down the road from where we are, they have had emergency alerts and they have had explosions overhead, potentially interceptions of either missiles or drones, but certainly there have been a number of blasts that have been heard by our CNN teams on the ground. In fact, we have a CNN colleague at Abu Dhabi airport, and they were all told to take shelter as well. So this obviously answers the questions that we had as to whether or not what the Iranian president said would be taken into consideration by the individuals who are in charge of the missiles and the drones. We're also hearing that Bahrain has had emergency alerts as well. Of course, it was a question as to whether or not